Well, we're here again with Dr. Eby, and we are just a few weeks away from Easter. And this is a story we know well. We love to preach. It's the cornerstone of the gospel.
Can't preach the good news without the story of Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday.
Absolutely. I wonder, we're so used to preaching this, right? Every year, I hope, probably multiple times a year. Is it possible that some of, we're 2,000 years away from the events that the Gospels record. Is it possible that some of the details in the Gospel we miss simply because our context is different?
Every Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, every one of them was written to a specific audience in a specific time period with a specific worldview.
Sure.
And the author and the recipients assume a lot of their knowledge, right? They already have it.
Sure.
We can't assume that knowledge. It's radically different society, culture, worldview, background, concerns that draw their attention. And so I am convinced that we regularly miss details that could be helpful in understanding the nature of the gospel message.
So I'm not surprised to hear you say that historical context matters. Can you give us an example?
Yeah, I think there's a really great example directly in the Gospels about this part of the story. The issue of the crucifixion in particular, it's told in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. We get this element of the crucifixion coming forward to us, but we really need to spend some time in emphasis on what's happening in the text. I want to look specifically at Mark, where the Gospel of Mark details this in Mark chapter 15. Mark is writing more than likely to a Roman audience. He's getting his information from the Apostle Peter. Mark would have been very young during the events of the crucifixion and resurrection, possibly an eyewitness. That's often thought to be true, but he's relating the story as told by Peter in just the months probably before Peter's crucifixion. And so we are passing on the tradition of the apostles here in Mark 15. And so this is during the season of Nero's reign. There is tremendous persecution arising out of that in the city of Rome. And the Christians are being scapegoated. The Christians are being violently and viciously persecuted. Shame being placed upon them. That's what happened with the crucifixion of Peter in the first place, is that this was a way for Nero to redirect the shame being cast upon him and to place it on a scapegoat. Just happened to be the Christians. And how better to do that than to crucify one of their leaders? But Peter and Mark, as they detail this story, there are things happening in chapter 15. For example, Pilate asks Jesus, and let's just cover a couple things as we talk about this idea of a Roman triumph. And this, we shouldn't lose this, because this seems to be the underlying motif of all that Mark is covering here. The element of a triumph was this glorious celebration, and every Roman and everyone in the Roman Empire would have known about a triumphal parade. It was a glorious parade. So lavish were the celebrations that historically we've come to know that at times the entire economy of the city was wrecked because they spent so much money on the triumph. It was the pinnacle of success and honor, which is the opposite of shame. And so what Mark relays for us, we can't really see the details of the nature of the crucifixion without understanding the glories of a triumph. So as we read through it, Pilate ultimately turns Jesus over, and he turns him over to centurions. Jesus was delivered to be crucified, and the soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is in the governor's headquarters, and they clothed him in a purple cloak. Okay, all right, we know and often are told that purple's the color of royalty, right? But it's more than that. The clothing in a purple cloak, that was reserved for a full cloak in purple was reserved for the emperor in the New Testament time period. And it would have been used especially during a Roman triumph. The emperor would be clothed fully in purple. His face would have been painted red to resemble the god Jupiter. And in that, they were making this statement that the emperor was processing. He was moving toward deification. Now, they believed the emperors became gods after their death at this point, but there was this sense in which they were progressing toward deification. Their face would be painted red. They'd be placed in purple. Keep going. Twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. Okay, well, we know, even in this image right here, we see this crown over being held by a slave. These details are recorded not just in 1, 2, or 3, but many ancient historical records that the emperor, the person being celebrated in the triumph, would be in a chariot pulled by 4 horses. And in the chariot with the emperor would be a slave holding what was called the civic crown, oak leaves twisted together as a symbol of their victory. Jesus is dressed in purple, not a civic crown of oak leaves, but a crown of thorns. See, everything that Mark is recording of the actions of the centurion and his soldiers, hundreds of them are gathered there watching all of this, was to set up a false triumph, to heap shame on Jesus. And instead of a crown of oak leaves, it was a crown of thorns. And they began to salute him. So they would offer the salute of Roman soldiers. Hail, King of the Jews. See, as the procession on the triumph would make its way through the sacred way, is what it was called in the city of Rome. Today you can even see this. It comes up, it winds past where the Circus Maximus was. It winds past the Arch of Constantine, right next to the Colosseum. And they would go down this sacred way into the Forum toward the temple, the great temple of Jupiter in the city of Rome. And they would put thousands upon thousands of people would be on this, and they would yell when the Caesar went by, "Hail, Caesar." That was a term that was used in approaching a god. Now, they're not doing this to honor Jesus. And Mark is not pointing this out to say that they understood. All of this was mockery and shame. They were striking him on the head with a reed. This is a scepter. That was a key part of the Roman triumph. And then they stripped him of the cloak, put his own clothes, and led him out to crucify him. See, all of these details are to the people of Rome and to the Christians in Rome who are experiencing shame, suffering, and persecution. It is portraying to them that Jesus himself experienced the full weight of the shame of the empire. As the procession went, the emperor would be in purple, would have a scepter, a crown. It was a spectacle. They had paintings that would stand 30 to 40 feet tall, depicting the victory of the emperor. They would go to the temple and offer sacrifice. What did they do to Jesus? They questioned him. "Are you are King of the Jews?" They put the purple robe to mock him. They put a crown of thorns and hit him with a reed and not the scepter. But then there's this interesting moment, and I think this is the pinnacle of the entire crucifixion narrative. See, the slave was behind the emperor, and it was said, we have multiple records of this, both Christian and Roman historians, that detail that this slave or this person, whoever it was that was behind the emperor holding the crown over his head, would whisper in his ear, something along these lines: "Look behind you, you are just a man." It was keeping the emperor from being filled with so much pride in the lavish nature of the honor afforded him that he would not provoke the gods against him, to be reminded, you're a man, you're not a god yet, you're just a man. Other detailing of it say this, that that the slave would whisper, "You are a man and not a God," for the same reason. But then we have this declaration that the centurion at the cross, one of that small group that had been entrusted with the beating and the ridicule and the shame of Jesus, stands at the foot of the cross in light of his death and all of the attending signs. And this is what that centurion says: "Surely this man was the Son of God." Do you see that Mark is building up that the emperor is just a man? For all of the accolades, for all of his power, for all of his regal authority, he is just a man. But this one who was shamed, beaten, abused, ridiculed, nailed to a cross, the most shameful way to die, he, in his death, disarmed the power of shame, and he was declared to be the Son of God. See, those details are not accidental. They're not incidental. They're not peripheral. Everything Mark is doing is contrasting the way of God through the path of sacrifice and suffering to bring us victory, in contrast to the way of the world that looks for self-adulation and power and authority. The cross tells us our victory is through the sacrifice. And the one who truly was God was willing to give it all for us. That detail in the story, surely this man was the Son of God, is critical to understanding how Mark gives us the story of the crucifixion.